March 6, 1944, East Anglia. 0512 hours. Frost lies thin and brittle along the grass skirts of concrete dispersal bays. The lamps on the perimeter road throw small islands of light into a darkness that is almost kind. Then a starter coughs. One engine, then two, then four, then 30, then 100, until the pre-dawn is filled with a rolling physical sound that settles into the body like a second pulse. Pilots slide into harness, gunners strap gloves over stiff fingers, navigators unroll maps across tables where pencils are already dull. In the nose of one aircraft, the glass throws back the first suggestion of dawn. Ground crews step away and circle hands at their throats. A green Aldous lamp blinks from the control truck at runway's end. The first B-17 advances, the nose dipping, its four cyclones turning a steady deep music, its bomb bay heavy with a day's argument, packed in 500-pound lots. That sound, the unbroken drone of four engines in time, will be the day's metronome, the symbol of a decision made 3,000 miles away. Men listen to it and grow calm because it promises the day will be long and ordered. Others across the water hear only what it implies, that after 8 hours of cold and flak and fighters, this sound may return. By the winter of 1943 to 1944, the air war over Europe had shed its innocence. In 1942, the United States had come to England promising daylight precision. They brought the idea of the Norden bomb sight, a mechanical brain of gyros and gears that promised to put a bomb in a pickle barrel from 5 miles up, and the faith that formations could defend themselves with overlapping cones of .50 caliber fire. They learned, as all armies do, by paying. August 17, 1943, the Regensburg Schweinfurt mission sent 376 B-17s into an experiment in range and resolve. 60 did not return. 9 weeks later, October 14, the second Schweinfurt raid, remembered as Black Thursday, saw 291 fortresses set out, and 60 fell or were abandoned, a loss rate that shook doctrine and men. German officers in fighter and flak commands read the results against their expectations and found comfort. 8- and 9-hour day missions into central Germany would break the attacker. Yet the winter brought a new arithmetic. The 8th Air Force grew. Training pipelines in the United States delivered crews who could fly a formation as if it were a single aircraft with 100 wings, a complex three-dimensional weave that took hundreds of hours to master. Navigation aids, G-hyperbolic radio beams, buncher and splasher beacons for assembly, and H-2X radar sets, Mickey, in lead ships, allowed a bomber stream to exist where before there had been a scatter. Fuel on fighters that had earlier run dry extended the protective ring. Paper drop tanks, 108-gallon, then 150-gallon, hung beneath P-47s and, crucially, P-51s. By February 1944's end, escort would be something a bomber could count on all the way to the target and back. The United States Strategic Bombing Survey would later write that the Allies possessed overwhelming superiority in war potential, a sentence that sounds legalistic until you hear it at the edge of a runway, that the engines will start again tomorrow, whether or not today goes well. German expectations were rooted in bitter competence. They had watched unescorted streams and counted parachutes. They measured American loss rates and predicted that daylight attacks on Berlin, the heartland of the flak belts, would be acts of theater more than strategy. They knew what their weapons could do. A B-17G could be broken open by 2 or 3 30mm Mk-108 shells laid in from a head-on pass. Frontal attacks shortened exposure and made gunnery instinct. Boxes that seemed invulnerable came apart when weather-scattered groups. The Luftwaffe's Reich Defense Organization was designed to turn energy into geometry. Radar plots flowed into fighter control, squadrons vectored into headwinds. Stormtroop FW-19s were assigned to plow into the box itself, a blunt tool used with unsentimental courage. Flak was the anvil under that hammer. At 25,000 feet, the air was a minefield of time bursts. In that world, an 8-hour mission did not sound like an operation. It sounded like an error. The reality that unfolded rewrote that belief. Operation Argument, Big Week, February 20th to 25th, 1944, began the erasure. In 6 days, the 8th and 15th Air Forces sent thousands of bombers against aircraft factories. German fighters rose, fought, and bled. American losses were heavy, but the Luftwaffe lost pilots it could not replace. In the language of reports, German fighter losses in February were severe. In the language of a man in a flak battery, they kept coming. On the first daylight attack on Berlin, March 6, 1944, approximately 730 bombers set out. 69 were lost. The cost was immediate. The strategic effect was slower. The sight of P-51s beyond the city killed a portion of the defense's calculus. A sentence attributed to Hermann Göring carries the weight of a system's truth. When I saw Mustangs over Berlin, I knew the war was lost. Escort had arrived, and with it, the second half of a pledge. The bombers that go out will be covered. Inside those hours, the work was a kind of ritual. Assembly began in the gray over East Anglian fields. At 15,000 feet, oxygen began to matter. At 20,000, it was the difference between dexterity and clumsiness. The noise in the ship was a neighborhood of sounds. The interphone, the headset voice, flat, almost bored, carried calls. The bombardier, hunched over the Norden, would call out corrections. The navigator, in his map-strewn corner, would confirm drift. The waist gunners, their worlds reduced to a square of hostile sky, called out fighters by clock position. A typical day to the Ruhr: climb, cross the coast, enter the flak, endure fighter passes, turn to the IP for the bomb run, engage autopilot, hold steady, release, turn for home. Through the floor plates, a man could feel the thud of flak striking the fuselage, a dull metallic cough. The drone of the 4 engines was the one constant. If you could hear it, you were alive. German officers saw that the Americans had taught themselves to survive by giving order to chaos. The combat box worked only when discipline kept station-keeping exact. And behind the doctrine was production, spare aircraft delivered, engines replaced, men rotated. The USAAF's Statistical Digest would, after the war, publish tables almost painful in their coolness. Aircraft production for 1943, 85,000. For 1944, over 96,000. Heavy bombers, B-17 at more than 12,700, B-24 at over 18,000, arrived in enough number that maintenance could be aggressive. Crews completed tours and returned home. Others stepped into their bunks. The Luftwaffe's calculus changed not because courage failed, but because the shape of the fight altered. Sturmgruppen still did ferocious work, but fuel scarcity cut training hours. Where in 1940 to 1941, German pilots had 200 hours, by 1944 replacements often had half that. The thermodynamics of the war: coal moved to hydrogenation plants, trains disrupted, oil refineries burned, meant a pilot's will was a resource for one fight, not a campaign. The great synthetic oil works at Ploiest, Luna, and Brux, once thought beyond reach, were now visited with a regularity that erased them from Germany's energy budget. In September 1944, synthetic fuel was a fraction of its former self. By late autumn, sorties were planned around fuel that did not arrive. Adolf Galland wrote later, with cool grief, about hopeless bravery, a phrase that returns to the body the numbing numbers of attrition. Within the 8 hours themselves, men altered their relationship to fear. In the cold, gloved hands grew clumsy. The oxygen-masked rubber tasted metallic. Crews, pilot, co-pilot, navigator, bombardier, radio operator, flight engineer, gunners became a single organism. Everyone knew a story about a ship that had fallen out of formation. And yet, after 8 hours, a ship's wheels would return to English concrete and make a sound every man remembers. The rubber's short chirp, followed by the groan of a heavy thing persuaded to be gentle. The drone eased from working to idling. Then the engines ticked with cooling metal. It was not triumph. It was continuation. In the debriefing huts over mugs of coffee, intelligence officers would ask, "Where did you see fighters? What type? Where was the flak heaviest?" The answers, sketched on maps, would become the data for tomorrow's 8 hours. The return itself shocked the defense because it erased the one pressure that had always changed wars: time. German officers had calculated the hours and invited fatigue onto the enemy by simple distance. The expectation in 1943 was that men asked to do this so often would break. Yet the program held because it was not asking any single man to fight alone. The drone of the engines carried more than a crew. It carried factories and training fields. The heart of the change is found not in any one mission's kill ratio, but in the sight of aircraft landing at dusk that had lifted off at dawn again and again. That return is the moral engine of a war for a society that has promised it will not commit a man unless it can commit to his odds. Symbolism in war is often accidental, then chosen. The recurring object in this story is a sound, the steady, physical, shared drone of 4 engines at power. It stands for abundance because there were tens of thousands of those engines, and the factories that made them were a system of miracles made ordinary. It stands for democracy because it is the voice of procedure, a schedule that does not ask one man to be more than he is, yet asks him to be all that he can, and then surrounds him with others doing the same. Hear it in the morning on a base with Nissen huts. Hear it at noon above Merseburg when flak is blacking the air. Hear it at dusk as wheels return to concrete, as Fido lines burn at the edge of an airfield to cut fog, and the drone descends into a rumble that makes a man breathe again. German officers learned, as we all do when our premises break, that the word never has a poor chance in a fight with organization. They never expected the return after 8-hour raids because 8 hours is a natural governor. The American answer was both generous and ruthless. Build a system that makes 8 hours ordinary. Place coffee on a table at 3 in the morning. Train a man until his hands do the right thing when cold. Create a radio net that will function when an aircraft has lost a turret but still wants to be told where to land. Somewhere now in a museum, a B-17 or B-24 rests. If you stand beneath the wing and close your eyes, you can hear the day open and close. The sound is heavy and even. It is the voice of a people who have decided to return after 8 hours. It is the engine note of a promise, and it is the echo of a truth this war wrote, that freedom is not an argument shouted. It is a schedule kept, a machine maintained, and a plane that comes home at dusk because men on the ground and in the factories and in the sky agreed that it should.